Welcome, everyone, to the April 2026 edition of the Mass ATC webinar series. For those of you joining us in Mass ATC for the first time, briefly, my name is David Paquette. I'm the Associate Director of Research here at Massachusetts AI and Technology Center for Connected Care in Aging and Alzheimer's Disease, which we refer to as Mass AITC. Mass AITC is a National Institute on Aging funded member of the AI and Technology Collaboratories for Aging Research Program. And we're one of the founding members of the A2 Collective, along with Penn AI Tech and Johns Hopkins AITC. The goal of our center is to accelerate the development of AI-enhanced technologies to improve connections between older adults, caregivers, and to more effectively support aging and the care of people living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias at home. Specifically, we're focused at the sort of the at-home and assisted living environment. Today's webinar will expand upon something that has been threaded throughout our series, which is how do you take a pilot technology and scale it to widespread adoption, be it a health system, assisted living community, or in the home. There are a lot of factors such as usability, affordability, and trustworthiness that present barriers to scaling these technologies. Today's speakers will zoom in on sort of this trustworthiness component through the lens of how to best align the development of your pilot scale MVP with both AI assurance standards and a view towards FDA regulations and guidelines for AI and enhanced technologies to enable commercialization and real world adoption. And so I'll briefly introduce the speakers, but before I do that, I just want to give sort of housekeeping is that we'll have sort of presentation and then discussion towards the end. So we'll answer questions at the end of after the presentation. And if you have questions, either add them in chat or the Q&A as we're going along so you don't forget them, and we'll sort of answer them and have a broader discussion. So first, I'm going to introduce the first speaker of this co-presentation is Dilip Mohapatra. He's the founder and CEO of Cognitive View, an AI governance platform that enables healthcare organizations and startups to move from AI pilots to safe, compliant, scalable real-world deployment. His work focuses on translating model evaluation metrics into audit-ready evidence to support regulatory readiness, clinical validation, and continuous monitoring. He works extensively with healthcare and age tech teams to optimize safety, fairness, and governance in AI systems. And they've been working extensively with Chai on some of these initiatives, which we've previously had speakers from that organization. So welcome, Dilip. And he recently gave this is sort of continuation expansion of a webinar he gave last month at the JHU AI Tech Technology Center. And Shawnnah Monterrey, who is returning and is an expert. She's the CEO and founder of Beanstalk Ventures, which has 20 plus years experience in medical and life science software product development. Beanstalk Ventures is actually one of only 9 FDA accredited third-party 510(k) review organizations, so it's important. She's experienced with both providing consultations and also the organization as a reviewer for these. She has an MBA and is a computer science background, and I think noteworthy is that at her time with Carl Zeiss Meditech, Shawnnah and her team, I think, successfully launched and obtained several 510(k) clearances, some of the first that were AI-based for glaucoma diagnostics. And I think she can maybe briefly touch upon what it used to be like versus how it's maybe hopefully a little more straightforward. So with that, I'll allow Dilip to share his screen, and we'll start with the presentation. But we're looking forward to a thoughtful discussion. And if there's companies and pilots here, hopefully we can sort of frame this in respect to the technologies that you're developing.
So just a quick housekeeping. So if you guys have any questions, just keep it to the end, and we can both Son and myself will touch those things. So yeah, just a quick background about myself, adding to what David has said. We are focusing on governance component. This seems like may feel like a boring compliance a subject, but a very critical nowadays in context to real world deployment, scale deployment into the clinical settings. And what we see all the time is a lot of companies who are building AI, they have great model performance, strong validation, but things really slow down when they start deploying into hospital settings or enterprises because they are getting asked a different set of questions about Is it safe? Who is accountable? And what happens if something goes wrong? Those are the things that's very different to what they normally do in building a model or proving that the hallucination score is not there, it's very accurate and all that. So we are going to deep dive into those specific areas. What's really important, and how do you prepare for a scaled deployment in context to healthcare and in a compliance environment. So today's session, I wanted to kind of set the scene here by providing like kind of a journey here in terms of when you start, maybe you're building a model, you're validating to make sure that the model actually works for the set of requirement or the use cases that you have, and also creating some evidence, because now the question is not about your model risk, but also about the people that are going to adopt, are they going to be able to trust it? And what are the things they are looking for? And if you are going to the clinical settings, so you may need to look for FDA. And so I will be focusing on more around the AI validation and how do you prepare for enterprise procurement, and how do you reduce that procurement cycle that typically goes from 9 months to 12 months to maybe 3 months. So how do you prepare that documented evidence that the people can or enterprise can accept it? And so now we'll focus on the FDA pre-marketing. How do you prepare for it? What are the things that you need to consider? But you can think of this as like a building blocks. It's not like, it's like a progressive step, taking one step to the next step. But a lot of the efforts that you put in a very structured way, whether it's building of a quality management system or how you built your model, test your model, or what kind of governance structure you need to have, or risk management, all these things adds up end of the day. And of course, there are a number of industry standards out there, like ISO, EU, and CHIS as the industry consortium there. Depending on where the priority and focus are, those are the additional standards that can be also looked into. So one of the things that we see all the time is what percentage of the AI actually get deployed in a production grade scaled approach. So we see it's a very small percentage. And we have seen that in context to, one of the MIT report came out that only 5% AI adoption rate in the enterprise. Uh, but it's the similar sort of figures when it comes to healthcare, because the challenge is not about, how great the tool is when it comes to adoption. In the real world, in clinical setting, things really slow down. So that's one of the biggest gaps that we see. A very small percentage of the actual applications get deployed in a real world setting. So where is the gap here? When we look at doing research and creating pilots or creating prototypes versus deploying it in an enterprise, you have two different set of success criteria. For a research, you looking for maybe strong metrics, publications in one of the topmost journals, or validating with the highest accuracy. There are different set of criteria or to look at the success of it. But when it comes to a enterprise, the expectation completely vary because you have different environment, different. It's a small hospital or a large chain of practices. And or is it a home care setting? They have all different environment and different settings, and depending on whether your use case touches on the clinical side of it, the things will also different change drastically. So think it like, if you kind of building a car, like building a prototype, running it in a test track is different versus running on the road. You need a license. You need to make sure that the person who is driving also have the license, but also the car is certified. So it needs a different sort of accountability and standard before the car actually is get driven in the road. So those kind of differences are very important in the real world deployment. one of the things, there was some research being done with some real data in the industry by CHAI, and which is the consortium for healthcare industry body, and the Scan Foundation, which focuses mostly on the aged care. So what they found is that when it comes to a lot of the AI applications, so the data is very underrepresented. Like a lot of the companies build or train the applications or model with younger population, but the AI is getting deployed for aged care, 60 plus, 70 plus, 85 plus. There is a big gap there. The second is that the usability and testing. So lot of the time, the model developer, they haven't fully thought through the person that is using it, what sort of and the environment that this will be deployed. So there is a lack of clear testing or validation, which is also a big gap that creates a lot of friction in the adoption of it. And I think the third would be also the usability. So I think, depending on, so when it comes to, let's say, home care or, aged care, in a different setting, you have different devices. There are different set of criteria that needs to be considered, and it can be very complex sometimes. So, and to fully think through about different testing strategies and understanding the usability can be a challenging aspect, but it's very important to really consider all of these things, because that's what the big gap that we found in the research. And if we think about why does this pilots stall, like why doesn't it go to production, a lot of them, and why doesn't it be able to scale? If we look into the aged care, let's take one example. Let's say we have a fall prediction model, and it can look into the medication, it can look into the sleeping patterns, and it can look into some of these different factors, and able to predict fall risk accurately. And it could predict this for, let's say, for one sort of environment or one setting, and for one location, and the team was happy that this is working. This could be before 48 hours, it can actually predict the fall risk. But it gets very complicated when the same model needs to be deployed to 10 different locations, because then the different set of questions are getting asked. For example, is this like for an advice, or is it actually something we can incorporate in our day-to-day decision making? If it doesn't actually predict, who is going to own it? And do we need to incorporate it in our clinical workflow and in those settings? And if something goes wrong, how do we explain it to the family and to the regulators? So there are a lot of those kind of unanswered questions, and the frontline staff sometimes get freaked out, and they want to know, am I supposed to use it? And if it doesn't work, who is responsible for it? And the leadership sometimes gets quiet because they don't have a clear answer for it. And what happens typically, what we've seen is that so it is something they don't, it is there for the sake of being there, but it's not getting scaled up. There is not a strong push to scale up. So that means it doesn't really get to from pilot to a production scale version. So there are a lot of those gaps that we all see all the time. So it's very important to really think through that final deployment and different scenarios, how it will be used. And this is where, as we move across, as you can see in the slide, like if we are looking into the home data, you have a set of historical data, and the risk is relatively low. If we are looking into the model risk, it is still manageable because I can predict and I can fix things and can predict it. In the clinical settings, this gets very complicated, and accountability increases substantially, and the patient impact is there. So we need to think about the risk a completely different, and the accountability that comes with it. So because the regulators are going to scrutinize if something goes wrong. So in terms of looking into these two key contrast things, what's really important to understand is that when you are doing a model validation, it proves the performance of the model, but it doesn't prove that whether this AI can be deployed safely and responsibly in a clinical setting. So what is important is to have that evidence. And that evidence and validation has to go together to make it deployable. So if we look at a real world enterprise setting, when decisions for an AI is getting made, it's not made by a single person. It's sometimes a team of people from procurement, from regulators, from clinicians, and business stakeholders, and they all have different lenses. So they're looking for different things. The procurement guy is looking for a proof or evidence, not just purely
Say it
metrics.
again.
A regulators regulators is looking for traceability. So that something goes wrong, they can actually understand where is the root cause. And clinician is looking for a trust. And we have seen a lot of gaps sometimes. The when we introducing the AI, it's that the AI actually creates more work for them because they have to wait, and it's not really solving the problem. It's not really something they can fully trust because it is not explainable. It's not giving how it get to the decision making process. So there are a lot of those complexities also there when it comes to enterprises. So we kind of look it into three-step process, and like a define, validate, and authorize. The first step is all about context. And why is it important? Because every use case, this definition of a use case, it's how ISO niche some of these regulatory bodies looks at it. Use case is very important because if you are doing a contract drafting with a chat GPT versus a clinical diagnosis or a fault detection, they are totally different context. So the risk is completely different from one to other. So you may have different hallucination score requirement or different set of metrics that you need to evaluate depending on that context. So it's very important to really define that context clearly, so that the use case is there properly. But then understanding what kind of metrics you have to test. And when we look into this, we look into two sets of metrics. One is about your processes, whether you need to have a human in the loop. Do you have to have a check for privacy, and how do you do certain things in certain way? So these are very much about the process centric controls versus technical controls, like hallucination score, prompt injection attacks, and things like that. So both are equally important to really understand the risk and prepare yourself for the final regulatory approval. But it's a very staged approach. You already think about, like, you have an AI life cycle management. How do you build AI, deploy AI, test your AI? But this all has to be part of that process to generate the evidence and have a clear traceability what's really going on there. And in terms of the output, we look at when we are onboarding a new AI system, when we test a model or check for a risk. So each of these steps creates a set of evidence. And the final output is essentially something like a readiness report that tells you whether the AI is ready to be deployed. That's like a yes and no decision process, right? So, and why is it important? Because what we normally find is a lot of companies, they just create a policy document and they do a snapshot assessment once in a year and think everything is going fine. But what happens when your model is changing, your processes are changing, your data is changing? So then the drift is happening, right? So you have to continuously monitor it. So that means you can't just look at a one snapshot, one-time assessment or a checklist-centric assessment to actually decide whether AI is ready or not. Because when this is getting deployed in a setting, you also have to understand if the actual output is working or not. So that feedback loop is supposed to be there. So AI readiness report tells you about the deployment decision. Model card tells you whether the model works. and what are the key things there that constitute the model and what it's supposed to do. And the trust center provides you that end-to-end transparency, something that like a public responsible AI disclosure statement that covers few different things. But a readiness snapshot, as I said, so sometimes you can think about it like you may have a higher fairness score, but that doesn't discount the fact that if you have a critical control that is missing, the system should block that you can't go further. So that means you have to look into that you have a good control coverage. Yes, there's, let's say for safety you're supposed to have 10 controls, and you are doing 9 controls really good, but one critical control is missing. That means it should block you from deploying further. So it's very important to really look at across those lens. So sometimes when we're looking at it, let's say you have total 40 controls, we would map it to all these different aspects so that you can also equally treat the like I talked about Scan Foundation research about usability. So if you haven't done a usability testing, that's really critical there. So you have to test it and make sure there are certain processes followed as well. So this is really about the readiness report to decide whether the AI is ready to be deployed. The CHAI model card, this think about like if you are buying a medicine or a drug, so you don't look at the, when you from a pharmacy, we're not looking at the research data or you are not looking at the lab results. So you're looking at that label, which is a very standard way to represent what does that drug or medicine consist of, what are the risk if you take it in certain way and so this is a very standardized way. The same thing applies the CHAI, which is the industry body has created this model card, and which allows you to document it in a structured way so that the person that is looking at it actually understand what does this consist of and how did you build your model, does it support fairness and equity, is it safe and reliable. So those critical information should be there so that they can make those decisions. And what is the difference between the model card and trust center? So trust center is looking into an end-to-end view, which is looking into things like if you are, where do you deploy your, your models, which cloud and what kind of systems you use, and are you using ChatGPT and is it compliant to HIPAA? So it is looking at full traceability and end-to-end view, so that to make sure that it is actually safe. Whereas model card is really focusing on the model itself. Both are equally important and complementary. And as I said, that sometimes you have to support certain specific standards. And CHAIs definitely have their own sort of test. They have built a set of test harness for different use cases. And depending on your use case, you have to kind of create different testing and make sure that the output is documented in form the model card. So yeah, I think just I wanted to quickly highlight again one more time, the evidence is really important here. And you think it as like a layered approach. The basic foundation of governance, risk and control should be there. But then on top of that, because you have built the right foundation, it's very easy to go for ISO, EU or CHAI, any of those standards, because it's just adding certain set of controls that's already something you already have covered in the baseline. And then if you're going for an FTA pathway, some of this baseline structure that you already have invested on will actually come in handy there as well. So yeah, so just wanted the last one. We have created a set of AgeTech testing framework, looking into some gaps that we found, like CHAI didn't have any user group. So we are, this is open source. We are happy to get feedback and to improve it. But the idea is that if for set up age care use cases, what are the different things we should test for? And also if we need to, if you want to look for sandbox, we got a sandbox to test some of these models and create an evidence. So that evidence can be used for reporting, for ISO, for procurement, and things like that. So with this, I'm going to hand over to Son to talk about FTAs and how to take it from there. So
I'm going to be talking about clinical pathways. I think what we'll see is very similar themes that Dilip had mentioned as input into the clinical pathway. Um, David talked about my background in terms of kind of highlighting how things changed. I think, I can start with that. What I'll say is back in early 2000s, we cleared very early clinical diagnostic for glaucoma. It was using a learning classifier based algorithm. So it was trained on normal population data sets. And basically, what it would do is a comparison to the normal data set to determine the deviation and the neurofiber layer thickness for determining whether someone had a likelihood of glaucoma. So we provided like an indication number. We called it the NFI, which was the neurofiber indicator number, which basically indicated the likelihood of someone having the disease or not. Back then, our goal was to iterate and retrain the algorithm. We understood how AI worked. We understood that more data would actually technically should increase performance. But with the FDA at that point in time, the algorithm needed to be locked. So at any time when we wanted to retrain the algorithm, we had to do what's called another 510(k) basically. We had to resubmit and get reapproval. So we couldn't continuously improve upon the model or the training set. So that was one barrier that we had that and now has changed, and I'll talk a little bit about how that gets achieved now. Um,
um,
Basically, the other area where we had some issues or challenges was around racial stratification. And so when we had our normative database, we trained our algorithm, depending on the market that we were entering into, there was a requirement that the training data set was very specific to their demographics. Right. So when we sold into China, we had to basically retrain our algorithm with the demographics in the China market. And that was a no-go from a regulation perspective. And so even though we stratified the database racially, we actually had to toggle and switch depending on what market we actually sold into because they believed the actual characteristics of the disease manifest itself in a different way that would impact performance. And so we're still seeing that today. So that hasn't changed. Right. So that's just a consideration as you're looking into this, whether or not if you're looking at doing anything from clinical decision or disease diagnostics, like is it actually performing differently across different races and different patient demographics. And we had it was age stratified because there was differences in age, and it was racially stratified because of the differences in race. And so I'm going to talk through some of that now, but I'm going to kind of level set here. So when you're developing an application, like to determine whether it's clinical or non-clinical, like let's just start at the top. So what you really want to focus on at that point is your indications for use. Your intended use is defining what your product is meant to do clinically or non-clinically, including any marketing claims you tend to make, anything that's in your labeling, which includes your website and user manuals, your design, and then using that information to determine whether the FDA application regulations actually apply. So I'm giving an example of like a non-clinical AI application and a clinical AI. And I put disclaimer here to say potentially regulated. The regulations change all the time, and it's going to depend on your true intended use statement and your device description. But I'm going to give you a little bit examples so you can kind of see which bucket you might fit into. And so one example as it relates to the aging population is maybe a daily wellness alert assistance. So something that tracks sleep. It could be biomarkers, non-invasive biomarkers. Invasive actually puts you into the FDA regulated camp, but non-invasive biomarkers such as blood pressure, respiratory rate, etc., making suggestions for lifestyle improvements. So the things FDA considers lifestyle, which includes hydration, drinking more water, walking more, sleeping longer, taking naps, etc. Those are things that are considered lifestyle or wellness type applications. So the key thing is that these applications do not make medical decisions. And so typically it's under what's called FDA enforcement discretion, which means they are reserving the right to enforce discretion on these devices if they deem fit. So they reserve the right to basically change the regulation at any point in time. And it's really focused on usability and engagement and a lot of the aspects that Dilip focused on. When you look at a clinical application, something that's potentially regulated by the FDA for this particular demographic, AI fall prediction tools, for example, so a tool that will analyze gait, movement, and health data, something that predicts the likelihood of falls, and then alerts clinicians to intervene and adjust care plans. These products are likely regulated. It generally will influence critical decisions and patient safety. And when it's regulated, there's different classifications. I'm not going to go into that today, but you have class one, two, and three, class one being the lowest, which generally requires a registration and quality management system implementation. Class two, unless it's exempt, it requires 510(k), which is market approval from the FDA before you can even market your product. And then PMA requires extensive clinical studies and clinical evidence to show safety and efficacy. So many AI applications, not all, are probably more software based than hardware based. So I'm going to focus a little bit about software applications and how they're regulated by the FDA. Give you an overview here of two terms. One is software as a medical device, and the other one is clinical decision support software. So software as a medical device is an FDA coined term. It's software intended to be used for one or more medical purposes that perform these purposes without being part of a hardware medical device. If you have AI that runs in a device, like my product was actually embedded into an existing system, it's SIMD, which is software in a medical device. And all the frameworks I'm going to be sharing around the AI total product lifecycle applies to any AI algorithm, whether it's in the device, in a mobile app, in the cloud, whether it's SAMD or clinical decision, it doesn't matter. It applies to the control. It's basically outlining the controls that have to be in place for an AI medical device application. Certain examples of SAMD include anything using image data, treatment data, sleep data, breast screening, etc. Those types of applications generally fall under SAMD. Then we have the clinical decision support software. So this is software that provides information or recommendations to support clinical decision making. This is where a healthcare professional can independently review the basis for recommendations. And so there's a misnomer here. I will hear people say that their device isn't regulated because it's CDS, it's clinical decision support. If you actually read the FDA guidance, there's a distinction between non-device, which means it's under FDA enforcement discretion, not actively regulated, and device clinical decision support. So if you're not regulated, the correct term would be non-device clinical decision support. Clinical decision support is regulated, and there's a little nuance here. A lot of people will think that just because the clinician can make the independent decision that it's not regulated, that's not the case. Okay, so you want to make sure that you understand where that line actually is. Just because a professional can make an independent decision just lowers your risk classification with the FDA. It doesn't mean it's no longer regulated. Some examples here is patient risk scoring tools, diagnostic support algorithms, treatment recommendation engines, clinical workflow prioritization tools, even for triaging. Those are regulated, and then drug interaction and dosing support systems. The FDA puts the software into three categories. This is primarily the framework for SAMD for clinical studies, but you can see here they have critical, serious, and non-serious based on the ability to treat or diagnose, drive clinical management, or inform clinical management, right? So as you go down the tier, treating and diagnosis is typically higher risk versus informing an actual clinician, which is considered lower risk. So this is the framework that FDA has outlined and has been working on to refine. This did not exist way back when. So whether or not things are more easier, straightforward, or more complicated now, I would actually say it's significantly more complicated from a regulatory perspective. I would not say, I don't want to say that it was very easy for us to clear in the early 2000s. It was not. We had to provide a significant amount of clinical evidence to show the actual performance of our algorithm, significant amount of labeling to explain how the algorithm actually worked. And so there was a very high bar in getting our product released. Where the complexity now lays in is all the different frameworks and the governance models, and FDA now has a predetermined change control plan. There's ethical issues now being raised. Like people are getting to more familiar with AI. It's used everywhere, and there's a lot of like big hype and exciting promises about what AI can produce. And there's also a lot of like scare and fear about what AI can do if not regulated, right? And so I think it's more complex than it's ever been. Um, FDA lays out the framework into four buckets. They have what's called total product life cycle. So if you're familiar with the software development life cycle or product development life cycle, it's similar kind of framework, but it's used for specifically for AI. A predetermined change control plan. This allows you, if you recall, with my experience, we weren't allowed to change the algorithm unless we went back to we couldn't update the training algorithm data set without going back to FDA and doing full 510(k). The predetermined change control plan allows you to tell the FDA in advance how you're going to continue to improve the performance of your algorithm without going back to the FDA. So you get pre-approval of that. Good machine learning practices, I'll go over that a little bit and some additional considerations at the end. Some myths and truths. I want to say these are some things that we hear in industry. Like once I release my product, I need FDA clearance every time the algorithm changes. That used to be true. That's no longer true anymore because of the predetermined change control plan. The same thing, cannot change my algorithm. It's fixed in time. That's also no longer true. And then AI ML diagnostics is a new thing. It's been around since the 70s. I cleared in 2000s. I think the first on record FDA cleared device using AI was in 1995 or something like that. So it's been around for a while. It's just getting a lot of hype now, a lot of promise, a lot of attention in industry. Total product life cycle. So I'm getting close to time, so I'm gonna go over these at a high level. Apologies in advance for going a little bit fast. But when you look at the total product life cycle, it's basically a regulatory framework that's aimed to promote a mechanism for manufacturers to be continuously vigilant to ensure the safety and effectiveness of their SAMD, particularly using AI. And so they care a lot about having data management in place. So this is for new and data training sets, like what's your data collection protocol? How are you ensuring quality of the data that's going into your algorithm? And do you have any reference standards that you're using? Some sort of auditing of the data training set, not letting the algorithm just continue to pile on data without ensuring that the quality of the data coming in actually represents what you're trying to produce in terms of your output. Retraining, making sure that there's change management, right? Understanding that the software has changed, reprocessing, rechecking performance, making sure that as you're retraining the algorithm that you're still meeting essential performance. Performance evaluation goes as part and parcel to that. And then just making sure that you have updated procedures on how you actually perform the updates. Right? Are you organically retraining the algorithm? Do you have a process and control in place to actually QC the data coming in to retrain the algorithm? Do you have something in place to revalidate the algorithm to make sure it's still performing as expected? These are things that are part of the total product life cycle. If you look at kind of holistically the pre-certification process with FDA, this was something that FDA was focused on a while back in terms of recertifying your process. So basically, what they believed, and they still believe this, but this is not a viable pathway currently. But what they did believe it is if you had a validated, consistent process, that you can produce consistent output. And so the thing I want to emphasize here is having a full process control around the actual design, development, implementation, deployment of your AI algorithm. Predetermined change control plan. So this plan, if approved by the FDA, so it's part of your submission when you submit your product to the FDA, if approved, allows you to make changes to your algorithm based on what's been defined in the change control plan. The change control plan is not for making additional claims in your product. It's not for adding new indications. Those do require new 510(k). But what it allows you to do is to continuously train and improve upon your algorithm based on the existing indications for use. So the main thing that they're looking for generally is to make sure that it's consistent with what they have originally cleared and what process and validation you have in place to ensure that. And so generally what they like to see is a separation of the training data set and the validation data set, and that you're using that validation set consistently when you're updating the algorithm to benchmark the performance of the originally cleared product. What they don't want to see is that performance is degrading over time, which can happen, right? If you're not QCing the data that's coming in to train the algorithm, the performance of the product could degrade over time if it's not being monitored. So that's really their biggest risk, is making sure that doesn't happen. So they're looking at in terms of performance sensitivity and specificity, making sure that you're still within the ballpark of what targets you originally cleared under. A good machine learning practices. So basically, it's a GLP process for machine learning, looking at data selection and management, so ensuring the quality of the data going in. So bad data going in, bad data going out. Um, Basically, fine-tuning your model, and then validating it and having a separation of your training data set with your validation data set, and then obviously going and retraining and retuning. So they understand now, which they didn't understand before, that there's an iterative nature to AI algorithm development, which they now recognize. They just want to make sure it has design controls around that. But they also recognize as well that there is advantages to continuously training and improving the algorithm. There's clinical advantages to doing that. There might have been edge cases that we couldn't consider before because we didn't have a large enough sample size. Now that we deploy it, we can collect real world evidence, and then we can use that as input back into the algorithm to then increase the performance or even scale across another demographic that we weren't previously considering. So the iterative nature is a good thing, but FDA just wants to make sure it's controlled. Okay, so from Beanstalk perspective, we help our clients go from prototype to cleared products. We do support regulatory strategy. We probably look at, I don't know, of the projects that we have coming in, probably 60-70% are AI based. And so one way we help our clients is helping them decide what their regulatory strategy might be. A lot of times, we're able to clear with a lower indication without the AI, and then adding AI later and using the ability to deploy the product sooner, collect real world evidence, then use that to train the algorithm, because the algorithm training requirements per FDA could be expensive and could be exhaustive. And so getting a first product out there has been a really strong strategy. The other things we help our clients with is actually building out the submission file, implementing the standards and the processes, and then getting them ready for submission. We have our accreditation. Some of these products do fall under our third-party accreditation, which means we can review and approve them on behalf of the FDA. So instead of going to the FDA, you can come to us. And we have templates and frameworks that can be used to help satisfy what's needed for FDA. And with that, thank you very much. And I think we'll open it up for, well, I'll hand it over to Dilip with some closing remarks.
No, thanks for that as well. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions for me or you.
I guess I can start. So from Divija Chandra, there was a question during your portion, Dilip, about usability metrics like TAM questionnaires, et cetera. So like, I guess factor in addition to sort of assurance and other standards, I guess, how do you factor in usability metrics or other aspects of, these AI systems or devices?
Yeah, so I think typically, for example, what we initially counted on, what Chai did is that for healthcare they divided to top 6 or 8 use cases, and for each use cases they created a test case or testing strategy by getting a lot of input from the industry to come up with a set of metric that needs to be tested. So where we found that age care was missing, so we created that as well. From a usability perspective, we factored in a number of metrics that needs to look into the real world scenario in a aged care setting or in a hospital setting. So, but those documents, it's open source. If you go to that link, you can see some of those metrics needs to be that should be tested. But always happy to get more input because this is the area that we see a lot of different devices, different settings, so different types of data points. So I think it's something can be continuously improved with additional input as well.
Question from, so following out from Javisha is, I guess, maybe Shawnnah may have knowledge of this, is that she mentioned that there was a bill in California, I guess passed in 2013, California AB or bill California AB 2013 that went into effect in January 2026. That was, I guess, their IP attorney brought to attention saying that there's a potential for using training models or open source models on prior data. And that if the data wasn't collected under certain expanded consents, it may have impacts on commercial aspects. Have you had any experience that with companies you'd work with? Maybe Divija can
Yeah,
expand
so
upon.
FDA's loosened up the language around real world evidence, and the patient consent is something that's needed for good, clinical practices. So that's still going to be necessary. You can't just use data without someone consenting to the use of it. But the change had more, and this is not going to the legislation. So the expectations are still there. And even from an FDA perspective, where FDA allows real world evidence, where it really opened up, broadened the use of that, or expanded the ability to use real world evidence, was around using de-identified data. So before that, you had to actually show the patient's information provided to legitimately say this is patient A, whatever. Now it could be de-identified, which really opened up the ability to provide data that's been previously collected. So you can, but the provisions still need to be there, right? And it's not just patient consent, it's also quality of the data, making sure that the data set that you're using meets the specific demographics and contraindications of your product. Right? There's other considerations that need to be done. Like you need to just make sure the data, you are legally allowed to use it, the data's clean, et cetera. Right? So I don't know if that answers the question, but
Um, just to respond to that, that all makes complete sense. He just told us this yesterday. So he
uh-huh.
says, no, it's very much in play, and it's actually it's causing a lot of risk for these big
Hmm.
frontier model companies. But he
Yes.
says one of the reasons we brought it up is that we are using basically foundation models, and then we are fine tuning it. And we've been looking to see if the open source models are clean and if the data themselves were available for commercial
Hmm.
use. But he says that's not going to be enough any longer because, for instance, the new consents require that you tell the subject that they can revoke consent
Yes.
unless their data has already been baked into a model.
Yes.
And
Yes. And that's part
so
of the
if that's
Privacy
not in
Act.
there, he says you could invalidate something
Mhm.
that was trained on data that was not collected with these new consent guidelines. So I
Exactly.
just wanted to throw that out there because it
Yeah,
was
no,
really
thank you.
troubling.
So, like in California, there's CCPA, and then there's also GDPR that actually impacts the US. If someone with a European passport uses one of these products, they can revoke consent at any time. So, if you use their data to train your algorithm and they revoke it, how would you actually handle that from a change management and then revalidating then your algorithm with that reduction in your data set? So, it is a tricky thing. And that's why I was kind of saying, Divya, with my antidote, like I think things are more complicated now than they were before. There's so many other considerations. I didn't even touch on privacy, right? So there's a lot of different issues around the use of AI, not just for medical purposes, but for any purpose.
Yeah.
But thank you for that.
Thanks. I'm going to
Yeah.
combine two questions that are sort of related to uh wellness. So there was questions sort of around like sort of Fitbit, Apple Watch, Aura, Garmin, sort of like provide sleep tracking, and that's probably wellness. And then Mark Francis brings up with the sort of this dispute between Whoop and FDA, I think related to blood pressure as a general wellness measurement.
Hmm.
And sort of there was some clarification from a January 2026 docket on general wellness policy for low risk devices. So I guess, is the FDA guidance made it clearer? Is there a new pathway for people to consider, or is this, it's sort of a more complicated thing? And I think that we're getting to, it's like you can track sleeping, but maybe aspects of sleeping, depending on how you're leveraging that data, would, go into this sort of medical device or
Yeah. So
other
this
area.
is a good one because everyone just reads what's out there and they don't actually read the guidance and they're like, oh, they loosened it up, so now it opens it up for everybody. That's not true. So when you look at Whoop and you look at their product, it's clearly for wellness. So they're collecting traditional biomarkers that are clinical biomarkers like blood pressure, right? Or typically used clinically. And so where the guidance actually made strides or headways is allowing non-invasive biomarkers that are traditionally used clinically to be used in a wellness application. That's the difference. But it's non-invasive. Anything's invasive generally is going to be a regulated product for good reason. So that's the distinction. But in terms of the line, what's wellness, what's not, it's exactly the same. So where Whoop was having challenges is FDA wanted to have them do a clinical study for their blood pressure and get that cleared because they said it's a clinical biomarker, but they said they weren't using it clinically, if that makes sense. So that was the change in the regulation.
Alrighty. Uh, I guess, Laura, do you want to do your question live? So there might be some context that I'm missing. I don't want to.
So we have a system in which we're collecting data for making a person being compared to themselves for the whole time. Does having a comparison to self, I guess, Aura and some of these other products would say that they're comparing a person to themselves. Does that make any difference when you're evaluating whether or not something is FDA certifiable or not?
No, I've seen it. I mean, it depends. The regulation depends on your clinical claims, right, and how you're using the data. So if you're using yourself as a baseline, I've seen that. Where it gets complicated is if you have, let's say you're under a 510(k) and the predicate is not using that method. So now it's technically different. How are you going to show that you're still performing with the measurement against yourself, right? Like for blood pressure, I had a client most blood pressure measurements have to be calibrated against something that's secondary, like gold standard or some other measurement to baseline it. And they had a novel technology to make it calibration list, and FDA said it's de novo. So they moved it to de novo, but they still have to do the same studies anyway. So it didn't really increase the burden, but the application fee and the timeline to approve is much longer and it costs a little bit more. But I think it still goes back to your claims, really. So it doesn't matter so much if it's comparing against yourself, except when you're looking for some sort of predicate, someone that's done something similar before.
Right, but if the issue is change as opposed to an absolute value, so here is what is normal for this person and
Mhm.
something changes, can that be considered wellness or is that necessarily clinical if it would affect decision support?
It depends what the change is determining. So when there's a change, what does that actually mean? Is it a clinical implication or not? Right. So if the change means, hey, get more sleep, then that's wellness. But if the change means, hey, based on this, you need to take more of this drug or less of this drug or
Mm,
something else, right? Or you're more at risk of this particular disease or your disease is progressing, then that's probably under the FDA realm.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah. So remember,
Um,
guys, I talked about the indications for use. It really starts there. What is your product doing? What are you claiming it does? What is it intended to do? How are they going to use it? Right? And does it make a clinical decision or aid with clinical decision support?
And then Selena, she's from Lumia Health, it's a pilot awardee of ours. Um, she was just, I guess, wondering more about sort of the third-party services and reviews that yourself and maybe other FDA regulatory consultants provide. I guess the review is it only applicable to AI-related products, or sort of does it cover a broader category of things?
So I actually did a presentation at FDA around AI. It wasn't this presentation. It was actually around like the statistics of devices out there and the complexity and whether or not third-party review should open up to those devices. If you look at the guidance now today, it doesn't exclude AI devices. There are product codes that are very specific to AI. Like I'll give you an example, like radiology. There's a product code for imaging radiology products. It's a product code LLZ. We can review and approve them, so they can go directly to us. As soon as you add AI for any sort of image rendering or any sort of representation of the data, and you actually have an AI algorithm, they created a new code, and that's not eligible. And so the thing is whether or not it falls under an existing code that's eligible. That's the key thing. And whether or not the third-party reviewer actually has expertise to review AI. It's very algorithm heavy, right? It's very different than electromechanical device. So it's whether or not FDA feels the third-party review, one, is it an eligible code? Two, does FDA have confidence that the third-party reviewer can do a decent job reviewing? I have had AI come in and FDA didn't push back on clearing those devices. We haven't cleared it yet, so I'll let you know how it goes. But we have had AI devices come in that were eligible.
Last question is around clinical decisioning software. So if there's clinical decisioning software that uses foundation models on textual data such as pathology text, biopsy report text, does it still need FDA approval even though the recommendations generated need doctor's approval in moving forward? I guess maybe it's a question around what clinical decisioning software is.
Yeah, exactly. So it depends what decision you're actually helping the clinician make. But generally, if you're providing data from external sources and not making the recommendation, then that's considered non-clinical decision support, meaning it's not under the current regulation. Once you take that data, let's say even if it is from external validated sources, and you start making your own recommendation, then it could be regulated. So just keep that in mind. My email's on there if you want to set up, if anyone wants to set up like a quick 30-minute call, we can go over your indications, we can look at the guidance and see where I think you might fall into and what's actually moving you in one direction versus another.
Great. Thank you. This is Gagan. That was something that we will reach out then. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, everyone. I guess we're sort of right up at the time, couple of minutes. So unless there's a last minute question someone's asked, but otherwise, I just wanted to sort of plug our upcoming webinar on May 19th, which sort of is, I think, in the space of expanding from a pilot to commercialization, from a mass ATC funded pilot trial trial chat, which they're developing an agentic AI chatbot tools for assisting older adults and caregivers to encourage participation in ADRD clinical trials. And so they haven't gone on, they've received an SBR phase one to expand this further. So hopefully we can, maybe as we're viewing this next webinar, we can think about it from the framework of some of the discussions here. But with that, thank you, Dilip and Shawnnah, for joining us and giving this very thoughtful and critical and detailed presentation on these topics. We'll circle back and share contact information with attendees, but it should be, you can on our website also find that. But thank you, and we'll circle back. Appreciate everyone joining us on this Tuesday. Thank you.